Good day, everybody, and let me start by thanking the Chief Electoral Commissioner of ECI and your fellow commissioners and the UNDP for hosting this event. It's a great opportunity to come and share experiences, and my colleagues, Mrs. Lynn White, our Chief Information Officer, and Mr. Andrew Gately, our Head of Role Management, come with open minds and hope to leave shortly with minds full of ideas to take back to Australia. You've asked me to speak on the subject of electoral literacy in formal education, and I do feel that there are many other electoral management bodies which are far more advanced than we are and what we do in Australia. But let me start and tell you what we do, and then in the conversations which follow afterwards, you can suggest improvements to how we can move our system forward. By way of context, Australia is actually a federation of 8 states and territories, and forgive me if you already know this, but our political system has an upper house made up of 76 senators representing the states and territories, which is elected by an optional preferential system, and a lower house made up of 150 members representing the 150 electoral divisions across Australia. Each division is administered by a divisional returning officer, and this is relevant as until relatively recently it was those officers which were the people which interface to the educational institutions within their divisions. The mandate for this, by the way, comes from our Electoral Act, which requires that we inform and educate our population. But I think this is a somewhat outdated model of delivery, and over the past 5 years we've been moving with the times. To start with, we have a National Education Centre based in Canberra, which is targeting school-aged children around year 6, so that's ages 11 to 13, and they run a program. Schools come, they run a 90-minute program to educate those schools on the Government of Australia and how to vote. This is very successful. It gets to about 100 to 120,000 children per year, but out of a population of school-aged children, about 3.7 million in Australia, obviously it's just the tip of the iceberg. So several years ago we started to modify our approach, and needless to say we went online and we started our Get Voting program. I invite you to visit our website and to look at the Get Voting program. It's basically there to allow schools to learn about the electoral system, to download guides, to create ballot papers, and to use the system to run elections within their schools. So, for example, elections for the head boy or head girl or the head of a student representative body. What we're trying to do here is to instill into the education system, if you like, the understanding of best practice or electoral best practice, and to give it a degree of consistency. So, for example, you can go to the Get Voting site, you can generate a ballot paper, you can order some ballot boxes to your school, and from there the school actually can run a school election for whatever particular thing they wish to do. It's really targeting the slightly older age group of schools, so we're talking about people in high school, so from years 7 to 12 of your education, so that's ages 13 to 18. And again, we're trying to use the schooling system to educate people around good electoral practice. Now, one of the issues we discovered with that is that while we can provide all these facilities to do that, actually some of the teachers in the schools are not confident in actually how the electoral system works. They may know for themselves, but to actually go and reflect that into the classroom, they were somewhat reluctant to do. So to counter that, we've started professional learning workshops for teachers which we then run a couple of times a year so that teachers can actually come and get certified to teach a little bit more about the electoral system. And again, what we're trying to do is to enable the electoral system to then educate the children as they go through their schooling years. If this captures the mainstream schooling, there's a number of other areas we need to pay attention to, specifically our Indigenous population. We tackle this a little bit differently, and we have now run what we call the National Indigenous Youth Parliament. This is where we go out to our Indigenous communities and ask them to select representatives to come to Canberra, generally for about a week, and to participate in an electoral education program. The picture that you can see is looking at the House of Representatives in Old Parliament House, and we ask that they come. They meet with numbers of politicians, they engage in debate, they learn a little bit more about the electoral system, and the intent again is to then go back into their communities, and while not part of the formal education system, it allows us then to spread the message to the youth. We first ran that in 2012. We ran it again in 2014, and I'm pleased to say we'll be running it again next year in 2017. It targets the Indigenous population, a slightly older age group, probably from ages 17 through to 23. Of course, that's not the only community group. There are a number of others. For that, we have a number of community programs. We have a fair number of people which come to our country which perhaps fall outside because of their age of the formal education system, so we use the community programs to do that. That would typically be done through libraries and through community groups. It uses the same channels that I've just described, the Get Voting channel, and again it's around informing people and educating people about our electoral system. This is all done under the banner of the Civics and Citizenship School curriculum. We are perhaps fortunate in that we do have a national curriculum, and there is a mandatory part which covers electoral education. It's not big. In total, the Civics and Citizenship curriculum requires that 20 hours per year is spent on this topic for every high school student, and the electoral education is just a part of that. So it's not a lot, but it is there, and it allows us to get into the schools officially to spread the word of electoral education as we move forward. So really, that's how we do things in Australia. There is some structure there which allows us to get into schools. We've gone from a very traditional model of using our local staff. We've moved on to the online channel. We're trying to reach a bigger group of people. We're trying to use the school system to do that, to empower the teachers, to actually teach this and to give them the resources they need, both tangible ballot boxes, ballot papers, and also the knowledge so that they can pass this on. And we also are trying to reach the groups which perhaps falls just slightly outside the school system. So our Indigenous Youth Parliament does that, and then also through our local community groups. In that way, we're seeking to educate our youth about the Australian electoral system, because we know that if we can get them young, they will then, by default, enter and enrol to vote, which is compulsory in Australia, and vote, which is also compulsory in Australia, and will run elections with integrity. So I thank you for listening to me. I hope that was informative in terms of what we do in Australia, and I'll welcome any questions in the session which follows. Thank you.
Thank you very much.